Hello and welcome to the second episode of what we're now calling Cars and Fuel. Today we are having...
We got El Rinconsito tacos.
That, yes. I can never remember the name of the place.
Whole onion.
They do, it's like a softly grilled and everything. It's very
throw
delightful.
a whole darn onion in there for you.
I love it. Today we are talking about autonomy.
Autonomy.
But in the context of not just autopilot features and stuff like that, but also just safety in general.
Yeah.
That's a really big trend in automotive design right now. One of the biggest advancements actually in automotive technology recently. Ever since the seatbelt, ever since airbags and traction control, it's just been taken off in terms of safety tech for
Arguably,
cars.
it's the most interesting thing happening in cars right now. You've
Yep.
got electric cars, which we talked about last time.
Yep.
And autonomy. And outside of that, like, cars are getting faster, safer, more powerful, but there's not a whole lot of differentiation outside of that happening. Everyone's more powerful, everyone's faster,
Sure.
everyone's getting 30, 40 miles per gallon.
Every car looks the same.
Every car looks the same.
Yeah.
They're designed by a wind tunnel,
Yep.
basically.
Yep.
So yeah, autonomy is really the big differentiator. And I guess on that note, I think you can really narrow it down to a handful of companies that are kind of pushing the bar as far as that goes. You've got Tesla, obviously, with Autopilot
Yep.
being beta tested on public roads and everything
Yeah.
like that,
Yeah.
for better or for worse. You've got General Motors with supercruise. You have Mercedes-Benz with Drive Pilot.
Yep.
And
And
who else?
Ford has
Blue Cruise.
is it called? It is Blue Cruise. Okay.
Blue Cruise, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know a whole lot about Blue Cruise.
Well, it was such a ridiculous name. I had to look it up to make sure it was that's what it was called.
Why is it blue? Why is
Well, because they're blue oval, right? They're the blue oval. No, it was so ridiculous. I couldn't believe it was called that, so I had to double check my facts there.
that is you know what though? At least you know that Ford will never get into any controversy or any hot water. It's like, there was a lot of issues with Autopilot being named Autopilot because people were like, oh God, that means it can completely drive itself.
You know what's the worst part about that though is that Autopilot obviously comes from the aviation industry.
Yep, I know where you're going with this.
Which in the aviation industry, it doesn't mean the plane flies itself.
Yeah, you still have a guy in the cabin, calling the shot. It's a pilot aid.
It's a pilot. I'm not a pilot. I'm not in that industry, but I believe it's really just for like the pilots to just take a quick moment to relax. Let the airplane do its minor adjustments that it needs to, and just so the pilots can kind of de-stress a little bit. Let the mind calm down a touch. Really,
it's meant to be used in the exact same way you're meant to use these assists. Like, you get up to the highway, you get up to cruising altitude, you're flying essentially in a straight line. I mean, not exactly a straight line because of the curvature of the earth or whatever, but, a straight line.
Okay.
And you turn on autopilot, and it handles that easy part of the flight. And then, like, landing and takeoff, that's where the pilot gets involved.
Yeah.
And that's how it's supposed to be for a lot of these systems. I do find it really interesting, and I was actually reading up on this last night. It seems like each of the manufacturers that's really pushing self-driving tech right now is focusing on a different aspect of it. So, like, Tesla is trying to do a little bit of everything. Like, they have their full self-driving beta now where you can use it on city streets, and it's okay at those, and it's pretty good on the highway because the highway is typically easier.
Yeah.
But it's largely just kind of like okay at everything.
sure.
You have General Motors with supercruise, which is highway only and only on very specific, like, approved stretches of highway that they've run and measured on. And it's highway only, but it's fully hands-free.
Yeah.
Given the right conditions.
I believe
and all
on highway it's slightly more competent than
Yeah.
autopilot. From
Oh,
what I've
absolutely.
read. Even their full, there's autopilot and there's full self-driving. That's a whole mess that we'll get into later.
Yeah.
Maybe, if we want to dive into that.
that. But they, it's from everything I've seen about it. I haven't driven a supercruise. Supercruise, a quick car. Yeah. I haven't driven a supercruise car myself, but everything I've read about it, everything I've seen, is that it's incredibly confident. And, like, you can let your hand off the wheel, and as long as you're paying attention to the road, you're fine. And then there's Mercedes-Benz approach, which, weirdly enough, it works on very
What was it
specific...
called again?
Drive Pilot.
Drive Pilot. Not to be confused with Nissan's Pro Pilot.
There you
I
go.
think. I can't remember.
But
Yep.
they actually have approved it now in Germany for fully autonomous driving on approved stretches of the Autobahn up to 37 miles an hour.
Very specific.
Which I question going 37 miles per hour on any stretch of the Autobahn.
Yep, 50 kilometers an hour, I think roughly is what that equates to.
But like, yeah. But supposedly their solution is fully capable, is what they're claiming. It's level 3
So
autonomy.
they're saying on very specific parts of the Autobahn, they allow you to be fully hands-off in stop-and-go traffic.
Basically, yeah. And I think that's the really big thing too, is that like that's the big problem to solve. That's the frustrating part of driving, the monotonous part that sucks. And what a lot of these systems are trying to speak to is if you can reduce the pain, if you will, of dealing with bumper to bumper, that's where those systems really have value today.
Yep.
Because like the reality is nobody makes a self-driving car right now.
Don't let Tesla fool you.
Don't let Tesla fool you. Even with full self-driving in beta, it's not good enough.
Real quick side note, this is a whole nother tangent, potentially a whole nother video. Full self-driving, Hardware 2.0 came out in 2016. Specifically October 10th of 2016 for Model S and October 17th build days for Model X. I think is correct. That's deep into my brain somewhere. That is over 3 years ago. 2016, yeah, that's over 3 years ago. Can you imagine the people that paid for full self-driving as part of their 3-year lease and never got it? And never got a refund?
Oh, I'd be livid. Because I remember back in the day, too, Elon was saying, oh, we're going to have a car driving across the country
next year.
Yeah, it was like California to New York to California, something like that. And that still hasn't happened, Elon.
No, hasn't. You know, the worst part is that initial full self-driving video that they released when Hardware 2.0 came out.
Yep.
I believe some Tesla employees have come out saying that was rigged. Or that there's some type of trickery in that where it wasn't like 100% honest demonstration of what the system can do.
Well, so it was super sped up, which smooths a lot of the jitters and imperfections out.
Good point.
But also, it was a stretch of road, and I may be misquoting this a little bit, so I'm nervous about putting this out there on the internet or whatever. But they had done that same stretch of road like over and over and over, and the run that they got on video was like the best run they'd had.
Gotcha.
So it took multiple attempts, and they never quite nailed it. Even on the one that they released, I watched the videos slowed down, and it's not perfect.
Gotcha.
It's certainly not perfect.
Gotcha. But yeah, going back to you know, basically what the current state of these autopilot systems are. We need to stop calling it out because it's a separate term. But basically, what they're for is for making your commute a little bit easier.
Yeah.
And I think they're fantastic for that. Even auto cruise is a game changer for stop and go traffic and stuff. I remember I was really tired back in the day when I was working at a Subaru dealership, and we had to swap a Forester with a different dealership. So I had to drive this Forester in the middle, you know, late at night, heavy traffic hours and stuff. And it had the auto cruise function, and it just made driving so much easier. You would think it would make you sleepier because it makes you lazier, but it's actually not. It actually reserves your brain power to concentrate on steering and just being more aware of your surroundings, which is actually really awesome.
I have a theory around that, actually.
Okay.
Highway hypnosis. As you're staring at, like, if you're driving, you're in 100% control of your car. You're staring at the road, you're watching the lines. That causes highway hypnosis, which makes you sleepy.
Yeah.
If you have, like, this car, for example, has adaptive cruise, the Distronic cruise control, they call it, where it maintains that gap. And just even that little bit of freedom, like I can look my eyes, I can look around, I'm not staring at the same fixed point on the road. And it takes a lot of exhaustion and effort out of that. For long drives, adaptive cruise and features like that are amazing. And anything that like will, you know, any of the lane keeping functionalities are absolutely stunning in terms of making those drives easier. I did some long road trips in a Model S, and on autopilot, it made a world of difference for, you know, handling highway driving, handling traffic, stop and go. It really is a great assistant. So if you're using these systems as they're intended, they're fantastic. And something else to think about too, like there's a lot of people who get this idea that I can turn on autopilot or drive pilot or whatever and stop paying attention.
Hop in the back seat.
Hop in the back seat. Yeah,
film a porno.
Exactly.
That's
yeah.
a category on. No, never mind.
But like if you're using these systems and you're not jumping in the back seat, if you're using these systems as they're intended, like it really does make it easier and safer to drive because you know, it's an extra set of eyes, right? Like instead of only seeing what's happening in front of me and being able to glance at what's going on around me, I can kind of trust the car to some degree to like see what's going on ahead at the very least, and then I'm freed up to, check my blind spot more often.
It's distribution of labor, right? If I
Yeah.
can get the car to do the very basic task of follow the car in front without crashing into it, I can then free up the rest of my attention to see, is this car about to sideswipe me for no damn reason, So as is right now, I see these driver assistant aids specifically in regards to the auto steer functions. Let's call that auto steer functions, right? A very advanced version of lane correction, right? It started out with lane departure warning. Well, now not only does it warn you that you're leaving the lane, it will actually correct you back in. This is like the super advanced version of that, where it's not pogoing you between the lane, it's actually actively keeping you within the lane. So this is the next step of that. I think these features right now, like you said, are a really great safety benefit, if anything. It's not quite autonomous driving just yet, right? And we'll talk a little bit later about, where that sits in the market, what's the purpose of that, if any, in its current state. But yeah, as is right now, it's a great safety feature.
Yeah.
I think, and anything to make cars safer is a really positive thing, I think.
Especially, and you kind of alluded to this even before we started filming here, but at a certain point, it does start becoming a little bit of a crutch for inattentive drivers too.
Sure.
We have a lot of folks. Everybody's seen the videos. You hop on YouTube, and you can see videos of like people watching a movie while their Tesla's driving.
Don't do that.
Please don't.
Don't do that.
Please don't.
One, it's dangerous, and two, that actually makes it more difficult for companies to push out these features because now they have extra red flags to jump over because of incidents like this.
Just slowing it down for everyone.
Yep, for sure. But yeah, in terms of these safety features, at what point they become a crutch, I'm thinking about how a year or two ago I was sitting in a car with my dad, where my dad's driving, and that hasn't happened in years because I have my own car and I go everywhere myself now.
Sure.
So it was really weird being driven by him, and as you get older, attention starts to drift. And I remember we got off of this off-ramp from the freeway, and we were making a left turn. There was 2 left turn lanes, and he had started drifting into the other left turn lane into the car next to it. And it's amazing the car didn't. The car next to us didn't honk at him or anything like that. And I was yelling. I was like, Dad, you're about to sideswipe someone. And having a car that would have lane departure warning or like a blind spot monitoring system, that probably wouldn't have happened. That would have alerted him. But then that also brings up the question, well, at what point is someone not using these safety features as like a last resort, as a backup? When does it become a crutch? Because I can take it a step back. Then I can say, well, automatics are a bit of a crutch too. If you don't know how to drive manual, then maybe you shouldn't drive a car. Or like we were saying before, what's the point of ABS? If you can't threshold brake correctly, then maybe you shouldn't be driving a car either. So that's an interesting point of discussion. At what point do these safety features become a crutch and actually become an indicator of, well, you actually shouldn't be driving in the first place if you're relying on... So our backup camera is considered a crutch, right?
Yeah.
I
think, so backup cameras very specifically, you kind of mentioned again before as well, but it kind of comes into play with the physics of a car and the design of a car, especially as everybody drives big SUVs, the blind spots, the kids running behind your car while you're trying to back out of the garage, you can't see through all of that metal. It doesn't happen. So things like backup cameras, I think I wouldn't consider that one a crutch. I would consider that more like an answer for the problem that we're running into because cars are getting bigger, by large. I wonder to some degree if ABS being such an important component of braking on cars today isn't maybe partially because of American drivers. Because in European countries and Nordic countries, they handle, you're trained to drive in the snow. Yeah. You're trained, you have to get a certain number of hours.
Sweden is 3-4 years of training before you can drive. Because you have to.
Whereas here...
Because you will die otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. Whereas here in the U.S., it's cool, you can drive around the block and park the car. We're good. Go get out there, champ.
Trial by fire.
Yeah. And so, there's a lot of people to whom driving is not really a skill. They don't consider it a skill. They don't consider it something to hone and get better at. Manufacturers are having to account for these lazy drivers. And I honestly, I think you're onto something here, too, because, it's absolutely, they're marketing these to make driving in the snow more thoughtless, to make driving in traffic more thoughtless, I think is what it's coming down to. And even the transition from a manual to an automatic, there are, performance gains. Like, realistically, an automatic transmission these days is faster and better than a manual transmission. It's objectively better. Subjectively, a manual transmission is a million times more fun.
Sure.
Not going to argue that. But I think that's what all of this is in service of, is making driving more thoughtless to some degree. And I think maybe that's, you go all the way, you extrapolate that even further and you go all the way out to self-driving. Yeah, get in my car, punch in my destination, and then take a nap. 100% thoughtless. I think the end goal here for a lot of manufacturers and a lot of people is to make driving just 100% a thoughtless task that we don't have to consider, we don't have to, have any part of, which is a huge bummer if you're a car guy.
Well, for these videos, like we did for last time, I really like looking at it from two perspectives, which is one as a car enthusiast and one from a practical societal view.
Yeah.
Right? So, from a societal view, is it beneficial for us to eventually get to the point where cars are autonomous and it's no longer like a required skill, right? Like, you and I don't know do you know how to ride a horse?
Yeah.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
You don't need to.
I don't need to, no.
In order to exist in society, you don't need to, right? In order to exist in society in a lot of U.S. cities, because our infrastructure sucks in a lot of cities, you have to know how to drive a car, right? It's as basic as knowing how to walk, for the most part, right? That's part of actually American, like, culture and lifestyle, is that you know how to drive. And there's also the romantic fantasy of, like,
it's
the freedom
a car represents freedom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But what if cars could get to the point where they're so safe that you don't need to drive them? Does that benefit society?
Absolutely.
I think so too, because there'd be far less deaths and accidents.
Far less deaths. I think it also enables cheap travel. Because right now you go and you buy an airline ticket. Yeah, especially as we started getting into more electric cars too.
Yeah.
You go buy an airline ticket. Like, I'm looking at maybe doing a trip home next month, something like that. Tickets are a couple $100,
Sure.
I think it's like, for me and my wife, $400 or $500 for us to make this flight.
Sure.
If we drove, especially in an electric car, what, 50, 60 bucks, something like that, $100 to get there in an electric car.
Yeah.
And sure, that means I have to spend a chunk of my day sitting in a car.
Yeah.
But, like, if it was completely autonomous, I wouldn't mind. What do? You take a nap, you play some board games in the car.
Yeah.
Like,
outside of the opportunity cost of, like, what could you have been doing if you had just flown there and been more productive, it comes down to a safety thing. I don't, when I was working at Tesla, a lot of people, asked, how long does it take to supercharge? I was like, well, it's about 20, 30 minutes, stretch your legs. And it's like, oh, I don't like to do that. I like to drive 600 miles, fill up for 5 minutes, and drive another 600 miles. That's pretty dangerous. Like,
I also don't want a road trip with you. I'm sorry, that sounds terrible.
That sounds awful. I'm tired after just 2 hours.
Yep.
I got a bad back, and it's just your concentration fades.
Yeah.
I drove to LA with my brother, and thankfully we had a Subaru Forester that has adaptive cruise. That really helped. But we're swapping every couple hours because I don't want to drive for more than 2-3 hours at a time. That's tiring.
Yeah, that sounds like
and when I'm tired,
miserable.
I'm more dangerous to people on the road. Of course, here in this country, we only think about ourselves. But
not wrong.
No, so from a societal perspective, that's a great point. Bringing up cheaper travel, and also more importantly, just safer roads.
Yeah, absolutely.
When this is happening, though, I think it's going to be a very long time. Purely because it's going to be a very long time before there are no human drivers on the road. And that's the part where we're stuck. I fully believe that we have the technology today to make every single car on the road autonomous and function in a much safer way than a human driver could.
If it weren't for human drivers.
If it weren't for human drivers, right?
Yeah.
As soon as there's even one human driver on the road, the computer can't accommodate for that, because if it is only as good as the person that programs it.
Are you familiar with a technology called Car-to-X? So this is something, I don't know if there's other manufacturers doing this, but this is something Mercedes-Benz started doing a couple years back. I worked for Mercedes-Benz right around 2018. I don't remember the exact time frame, but in the new E-Class, they introduced a technology called Car-to-X, where the idea is that your car can communicate with other cars that also have Car-to-X, or in the road, they have, like, stations of some sort that would then also be able to communicate with your car. So, like, the idea there being, hey, a car, I don't know, 10, 20 cars ahead of me hits an ice patch. There's something slick coming up ahead, or there's an accident, or he's having to emergency brake, so there's a line of emergency braking coming backwards, right? So the idea there is that any of those cars with Card X could then communicate that to the other cars around them, and they can react before they actually have to react. So there's things like that that I think will answer for a lot of the minutia of human behavior and behind the wheel. But then also, I think there's also something to be said for, we don't necessarily need full self-driving everywhere. This doesn't need to be introduced at all, for 100% of my daily commute to be self-driving. That doesn't need to be the case. If they could do, circling back to the beginning here too, like what GM is doing with supercruise, or what Tesla has largely done to this point with Autopilot, if my car can drive itself on the highway, if I can get to the point where I can be truly hands-free on the highway, that in and of itself reduces, that makes travel so much easier. That opens up a lot of doors in society. You can get a bus driver who's doing like cross-country road trips, the Greyhounds. He takes the bus to the city, gets it up on the highway, and from that point on, he's just there to monitor. And so I think there's some really interesting things that are going to happen, because highway is the easier part of this to solve. Driving in the city with all of the variables that come with that, there's just far fewer things to solve for once you get up to the highway.
Pedestrians.
Cats. Yeah. Cats,
Yep.
yeah. Raccoons.
Yep.
The occasional rabbit. But, from a societal perspective, once you get it to the point where you can drive cross-country automatically, I think there's a lot to be gained there.
Yeah, going back to where we are now, though. So, what technologies do you think nowadays are making people softer? Less, not as good of a driver, and which technology do you think are actually just necessities because we're human? So we talked about the back of camera. I don't think that's a crutch, right? Because like you said,
that's solving for a physics issue.
Yeah, and also as cars get safer, they're gonna have thicker A-pillars and stuff. So in that sense, blind spot monitoring system too. Some cars you just can't see out of.
Yeah.
Camaro, Supra.
Chevy
Camaro comes to mind super quickly. The Supra
too.
that we tested last year, it was fine for the fact that it has such a massive D pillar, but it's not great. And it's amazing that blind spot isn't standard, but it's a B&W underneath, so that's probably why. But I wouldn't get that car without a blind spot monitoring. That'd be irresponsible for me not to get it without blind spot monitoring.
Unless you're just trailing it to the track.
Yeah, I guess so. But yeah, at what point do features become a crutch? There's certain features that are similar to like a back camera. Tesla has this really great feature. Actually, Infinity did this before, where it can detect an accident 2 or 3 cars ahead, because it can use the radar to go underneath the car in front and then detect 2 or 3 cars ahead a car that's panic stopping. I can't possibly see that if there's an SUV, right?
Yeah.
That solves an issue that I literally can't be a better driver to compensate for that.
That actually, I can speak from experience. That actually saved me from an accident in a Model X.
Oh wow.
There was a guy got rear-ended 3 cars up, and the Model X, I never saw it. I never saw it happen.
Yeah.
The Model X just all of a sudden hit emergency braking for no reason. I was confused.
Yeah.
I had no clue what was happening.
Yeah.
But it slammed on the brakes. I had it in autopilot when this was happening.
Yeah.
It slams on the brakes, and I'm like, what is going on? I move out to the other lane and go past, and I see just 2 or 3 cars up, somebody had gotten rear-ended and just come to a dead stop.
You had never seen that accident.
Zero chance.
Yeah.
I never. And maybe,
no amount of training could have made you better for that situation.
Absolutely not. Maybe I could have reacted and stopped it and been fine, but that was an example of it absolutely saving my bacon there. Honestly, the first thing that comes to mind is all-wheel drive. For so many people, all-wheel drive is treated as the answer to all of my winter weather worries when driving. Oh, I don't need to worry about chains. I don't need to worry about proper tires. I've got all-wheel drive. I'm fine.
Who cares if I have bald tires? I got all-wheel drive.
Exactly. And, all-wheel drive is great for one thing and one thing only, and that's getting you going. Outside of that, actually with modern cars, there's some stability advantages for turns and stuff like that, but largely, the purpose of all-wheel drive is to get you moving so you're not stuck. Good set of snow tires will do that just fine.
In most places, yeah.
there was a very famous Tesla owner, Bjorn Nyland. I think it was Bjorn. Who he was like in Sweden or Norway.
Norway.
And he had a rear-wheel drive Model S 85, or I think P85. And Tesla advertised this. They did clips of this because this guy was driving through incredible wintry conditions with nothing but snow tires. And that Tesla was rear-wheel drive at the time. So
Model S was actually the most popular selling vehicle in Norway before all-wheel drive came out.
a lot of that had to do with like tax credits and the pricing of the vehicles, but yeah.
Just let me skew my statistics one time. No, but yeah, for sure, all-wheel drive. I think the threshold that I talked about before we started filming was a safety feature becomes a crutch when it becomes used way too often.
Yeah.
Right? If you're running into kids all the time, your backup camera is not a safety feature anymore. It is a crutch to compensate.
If you're running into kids all the time, please get off the road.
ABS. If you're activating ABS once a day, you probably need to learn to drive better.
Yep.
In my BRZ, I've activated ABS about 3 times in the past 3 years that I've used it. Mostly because I upgraded the tires, and when you have better grip, your tires don't skid because they can actually stop correctly. That's an indicator of good grip, is your ABS not coming on. The forward collision avoidance, right? If it stopped you that one time 2 or 3 years ago, great.
Yeah.
If it's engaging every single day, we might have to.
If I'm hearing the warning alarms every time I drive my car, that you may have an issue.
But one thing that you were really excited to talk about was lighting tech.
Oh yeah.
Because I think lighting tech is up there in terms of something that is truly a feature and not a crutch.
Yeah.
Because you can't beat physics.
It's amazing to me that in 2022, I have to stop myself and think about that. In 2022, you can still buy cars with terrible headlights.
With halogen headlights.
With halogen headlights. I don't understand how that is not something that has honestly been mandated by now. Like, there's zero reason for it.
You know how we always talk about the S-Class as a showcase for technology? It brought airbags, to the masses. It brought GPS to the masses. It brought traction control, ABS to the masses.
Brought LED taillights.
It brought backup camera to the masses. Auto cruise control. You can get that in like a cheap Hyundai now. It didn't bring HIDs to the masses, apparently.
I did not. You got to get the extra lighting package for that nonsense.
Yeah, I don't expect every car to have LEDs.
Sure.
I expect them to have HIDs. That's a difference, by the way. That's a whole nother video that I'll get into. But it just seems like that's really old technology at this point, HIDs. But they're still great. They're still way better than halogens.
It is expensive. And maybe that's a piece of it. Because people who are buying inexpensive...
Why is it expensive, though? It's been out for decades.
I couldn't tell you. Because typically when those are manufactured, like, you can't replace the bulb by itself. You have to replace the whole headlight assembly.
There's a thing of LEDs. LEDs, you have to replace the whole thing, but HID is a bulb. So in terms of servicing, it's still cheap. It's cheaper.
Never mind then.
Yeah.
Zero reason. They got to do it.
In fact, HIDs, they have a much better life span than halogens, so you wouldn't have to replace them as often. I will say, though, because you don't replace them as often, usually they're more difficult to replace. Not like halogen where you reach in. My TL dealership quoted me $200 in labor to change the bulbs.
Damn.
And I was wondering why. And then I looked inside and realized you have to take apart most of the front. So I spent an afternoon taking apart the bumper, removing the
Just
headlight.
for the headlight.
Yeah, well, the annoying thing is because you have to remove the bumper, remove the headlight, replace the bulb, the headlight alignment is off. So after you put the headlights back in, you have to realign it. So that's like another additional step. The average consumer isn't going to do that. So maybe, but you can also design it so that it's not the case.
Yeah, if that were the standard, one would think that
HIDs are also more dangerous. Because that ballast, it operates at 40,000 volts. If you touch something incorrectly, you will die.
So maybe
Maybe it's a safety thing.
maybe.
But still, the benefits of having proper lighting, there's just...
It makes a world of difference, Like, you're driving down a dark road, you're driving, it's unbelievable, the difference that makes. I really like that night vision cameras tried to be a thing for a little bit. Like, this car could have come with the night vision camera.
Yeah, except it only works when you have the headlights going, right?
I don't remember.
That was the famous Top Gear bit. It was just like, I wanted to see if I could drive with just night vision camera. He turned off the headlights, and on the dash it said, night vision only available when headlights are turned on. So at that point, why? I guess it sees slightly further?
Slightly, I imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe if you're somebody like me who has poor night vision, maybe it can be used to better differentiate shapes and objects. Because, like, the example that they gave in the video for it.
It's highlighting animals and stuff.
Yeah, it does a really good job of highlighting animals and children who are running around on dark roads at midnight when you're living in the Silent Hills.
They call that Darwinism back when I was young.
Maybe don't let your kids play on dark roads.
Yeah, it's a good lesson.
At midnight.
It's a good takeaway.
But they did it for like a deer too, and like the shape of a deer was made out.
Yeah.
I guess they could have just moved the Animal Crossing further down the road.
On a whole, I find headlights to be like almost essential to safety.
Yeah.
Because I don't ever want to hear the argument, well, you should be able to drive with fireflies and enjoy. You should be able to drive with an oil lantern as your headlight. If you're a really good driver, you should be. No, no, that's not how that works. However, I will say when we're on the subject of features that have become a crutch for people, automatic headlights.
Yes, I was about to say that.
Automatic headlights, the worst part of automatic headlights is when they're set up in such a way that don't encourage you to turn them on when they're actually off. And what do I mean by that? Is cars with the gauge cluster that are fully lit when the headlight is off.
Yep.
So the person driving has no idea that their headlights are off.
I see that all the time here.
Mostly with Toyotas, because I think it's something about the way they light up the gauge cluster when the light is off. And I believe Volkswagen has a very German workaround for this. Okay, you're gonna love this.
I love this.
You're gonna love this. Gauge cluster turns on even when the headlights are off. So that even in the daytime, you can see the numbers on the dash.
Yeah.
But when it goes dark, it knows that and it turns off the gauge cluster lighting so that you know to turn on the lights.
Go Volkswagen. That is.
It's a very.
I love that so much. They're what they have literally said is we are going to inconvenience you. Because you need to turn your lights on.
Yeah.
And that's something that since I moved here, honestly, that has driven me absolutely crazy because I've not experienced this anywhere else.
Yep.
But like...
It's a lot of Toyotas and Hondas.
Yeah.
Pay attention. Look for the cars that don't turn the lights on. A lot of them are Toyotas and Hondas.
Yeah.
Please comment below if I'm wrong. But it's Toyotas and Hondas. I don't know what about their interface does that. I think for Honda specifically, it's because their DRLs are so damn bright. People think that their main lights are on.
I see that all the time.
Mazda occasionally has this problem, but I think Mazda is much better about indicating it on the gauge cluster. Mazda has a problem because their DRLs are just their main beams, and it's at full brightness, so you do not notice a difference as a driver.
Oh.
The difference being, of course, is me behind you.
The
it's
taillights.
completely dark, and if you're in a black car, and I've seen this before, a very dark car with their headlights and their taillights off, in the rain, in the fog, and I'm just like, are you kidding me right now? Like, are you that? That's a crutch.
And all of that so that I have to avoid reaching over here and just turning a knob or flipping a switch.
I think auto headlights are great as long as it's set up in the way that we were just talking about. If it makes it super obvious that you have them off, but the problem is a lot of cars have these super bright DRLs that people keep thinking are their main beams, and they can drive just fine.
Honestly, I think there just shouldn't be a way to turn it off. It should just
Turn what?
Your headlights should just default to on. That makes.
I like that idea.
Like, I feel like this has been way overcomplicated. Just make it to where your headlights. It's automatic. It knows if it's dark.
Yeah.
They're just always on. It doesn't hurt anything to have your headlights on during the day if like something breaks.
Stalkers, they can't do their job correctly if they have their headlights on and they want to keep the car running.
Well, maybe if you're an auto manufacturer, you should not build your car around the stalker market. That's
So are you saying, Steffan Rowe, that if an auto manufacturer creates a car that can turn off headlights, they are catering to stalkers?
You know what? I'll come out and say that today, right now.
Auto manufacturers of the world, if you can continue to build cars that can have headlights that turn off completely, you are building cars for stalkers.
They can bring back the Plymouth Prowler. Plymouth Prowler?
What about the Prowler? It's a great car.
Yeah, make it that would be the perfect car for stalkers. That can be the the Prowler. It's just a great name for it.
Oh.
That is the vehicle of choice for stalkers. That's the only car that you can buy that the headlights turn off. That's the exception we're gonna make.
So Camaros and Discoveries are driven by murderers, and the Prowler is driven by prowlers.
Exactly.
Is that? I like that. Okay. Wow. Yeah, auto headlights are just so tragic.
I agree.
It's an example of something that was designed to be more convenient for someone, but has actually created more problems than it's solved.
I think there's a lot of options in cars that are like that. Not so. I think there's probably fewer that are crutches because most things in cars are designed, like they design some new technology to speak to a problem that exists, right? So, but I do feel like there's a lot of technologies that are just further issues waiting to happen. You know. Falcon wing doors.
Capacitive buttons for literally everything.
Capacity.
Volkswagen Auto Group, are you listening?
Cadillac. They like their haptic feedback on the center console as well.
Lexus.
Lexus does that too? Gross.
Yes and no. Worst, you have to use their mouse trackpad thing for heated seats. For climate control, there's a physical toggle, but there's no heated seat physical button. You have to dig through 3 sub-menus in order to get to heated seats. Yeah.
Okay, look, in 2022, I am down with touchscreens in cars. Like, I have no real issue with as much as we expect from our media interfaces on cars and everything like that. I really have zero issues with accessing a lot of things from touchscreens.
Yep.
But you want to talk about something that is like becoming problematic on that? Touchscreens in cars, like relegating every single function on your car to a touchscreen is the dumbest, worst idea.
Wipers on Tesla. Because first, the automated wipers don't work.
Yeah.
So now you have to pull up the
Because they took out the moisture sensor to save money.
Correct. They just rely on the autopilot cameras.
Yep.
And so now you have to dig through a menu.
If you hit the button, the button, it'll trigger it, and then it'll like bring up the menu, and you can swipe.
Yes, my brother discovered that. But prior to that, he had to dig through the menu while driving, while the rain is on his wiper.
Yeah.
Crazy.
It's unbelievable.
You want to talk about a safety issue? Unbelievable.
And that's actually something that's really frustrating too, because like a lot of manufacturers, probably within the next 10 years, every single car that you buy is going to have some kind of gigantic touchscreens plastered in the middle. Yep. It's gonna happen. Accept it.
Sure.
But there's still a place for actual buttons. There's still a place for all of that, and especially until we get to the point of fully self-driving cars. I still need something that I can reach down blindly and hit to enable my wipers or adjust my AC. I love having a physical switch for air conditioning.
Do you know about the Volkswagen ID.4's window controls?
No.
You have 4 buttons over there on your Mercedes, right?
Yes.
Right? 1 for each window?
Yeah.
The ID.4 has 2. In order to roll down the rear window, you have to press a separate button to say that you're in the rear mode, and then you use those same front window switches to lower the rear windows. Why?
I cannot think of a single good reason for that. Like, usually,
That's what I'm saying.
I think you can justify a lot of poor decisions. Like, and you can at least see where a designer is coming from for that. That makes no sense.
Makes no sense.
I
don't get it.
Sense.
I really don't get it. But yeah, I think we've well established there's, lots of pros and cons to these advances in technology. Most of them are good. On the most part, it's making cars safer. But then on the other side, we're kind of talking about, is making cars safer actually better? It's the teach a man how to fish type of thing.
Yeah.
Right. Now, here's the more philosophical side.
All right.
Right? You touched on this a little bit earlier. Where does that leave the car? Right? Like, it is no longer a thing of enjoyment. It is now a 100% a to B thing. It's a tool.
It's an appliance.
It's an appliance at this point, right?
Everything's a Toyota.
Yeah, everything's a Toyota. Speaking of Toyota, here's a very interesting thing that I thought of. The thing I love about my BRZ is that it is one of the most communicative modern cars that you can buy. Yeah. Their older cars are a lot more tactile, more analog, but the BRZ and the Miata are the 2 cars that are the most analog feeling to drive today, under a reasonable amount of money. I love that about the BRZ. It has this very fantastic blend of kind of old school feel, but it has traction control. It's not complicated traction control. Sure. It's on off, and there's a sport mode that lets you slip a little bit. It's not the sport mode where it makes like your steering heavier and your throttle sharper. It's a genuine sport mode. It's like, have a little bit of fun without killing yourself. Yeah. Right? That's a crutch, okay? I will admit that. But on the whole, it's a very simple car. I don't even have steering wheel buttons on my BRZ. It has a backup camera though. Doesn't have blast monitoring. Generation, along with the Toyota 86, I think it's called the GR86, which is amazing because they sold enough sports cars to justify it from a financial perspective. Yep. And that brings joy to my heart. Because nothing kills me, Steffan, than car enthusiasts saying, I want such and such to build this sports car. They build it and no one buys it.
Nobody buys it.
Yep.
Yep.
And then they wonder why it goes away. I'm like, oh, well, Toyota should have built this. Well, you didn't buy it. What do you think they were going to do? Keep selling cars at a loss? So it's great that they built the second generation car. The BRZ, however, has super eyesight technology for the automatic models, meaning that it has the 2 cameras that makes that Subaru does for their auto cruise control. They don't use radar, by the way. They use 2 cameras. It's all vision. It's all vision. It uses 2 cameras so it can do depth perception. So fog, probably not so great for it. But it has auto cruise for the first time in a BRZ. Have you ever driven a pre-autopilot Model S
Yes,
rear
actually.
drive?
Yeah.
Have you compared that to a rear drive Model S with autopilot? The steering is actually different. It has a completely different steering rack. It has a number steering rack because, right, it has to have additional gearing for a motor to interfere with your steering.
Yeah.
So now I'm wondering, sitting here, okay, one of my favorite cars in current times with one of the best steering feels on the market has auto cruise technology. Does that mean it has worse steering on
Have
that
they
model?
moved to a fully electric rack on that then?
They've always had.
Oh,
My
okay.
BRZ is an electric rack.
My mistake. I could have sworn that was a regular mechanical
It's a
rack.
very well calibrated electric
Yeah.
rack. It's one of the best on the market. It's actually, some people like it over the 991 generation 911 because that was the
It's
first.
a lofty claim.
Yeah. Well, a lot of side note, a lot of BRZ owners, when they get more money, they'll buy like a Cayman and whatnot, or 911, and they find that it drives awfully similarly.
Yeah.
You're just paying a lot more for that experience. So it's a great car for the price. Highly recommend 1010. But now I'm wondering, one, is the steering feel ruined on that Auto Cruise model of BRZ, which you can only get with an automatic, by the way. So it would be ruined on that aspect. But in terms of the steering feel, is the steering worse on that model, or do they just, for build's sake, just make every single car with that same steering rack?
I don't know. It's so tough to answer that because these automotive engineers have done some really interesting things with the packaging of like the same car with multiple different options and stuff like that.
But this is the question. Like, are we now getting to the point where safety features are ruining the driving experience? Because these features that we've talked about up to this point, great on your Mercedes right here. Because this is what it's meant to do, right? It's meant to take you to A and B in a very comfortable fashion, in a very safe fashion. But the actual purpose of a BRZ is for driving experience. So if you're adding blind spot monitoring, which is fine, I guess, but like a lane keep, it will actually keep you in the lane.
So to answer that, I'm going to reference what I personally believe is the single greatest car ever made.
Okay.
The McLaren F1.
Yes.
McLaren
It's a great car.
F1, 0 driver assist.
Yeah.
No, I don't even think it had traction control, but
definitely no traction control. I don't think it had ABS either.
no ABS. Complete mechanical rack with no assist. It was all just. I don't know why I'm blanking on the words for this, but no power steering, no nothing.
Yep.
And that is considered to be one of the greatest analog experiences you can possibly get on a car.
Sure.
Compare that to the McLaren P1. All the technology, hybrid drive, electric rack, traction control, all this other stuff. And it's still an absolute widowmaker. So, and some of that is just quite frankly because it's faster, but also I love the review that Chris Harris did on the P1. And, the joy that he had driving that P1, man, I don't know that that's any less than he would have had driving the F1. I think when done right, as long as care is applied to it, I think there's still a lot of room to make. I don't know that it compromises the experience. I think there's still a lot of room to make fun cars that are still communicative, and maybe Tesla just didn't care about that specific aspect of it.
I get that, but I would also argue the P1 is exciting because McLaren didn't get overboard with assistive technologies. Because if they really cared about making a really fast car, they would have made that all-wheel drive, like the 918 was.
Technically, isn't it still the fastest? It's
It
the
is.
hardest to extract that speed from.
Right, but they want to make it even faster.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can tell that they, on purpose, made it a little bit less safe. And I think that's because they knew if they overdid the safety aspect of it, they would have made a car that was more boring, and that's what they...
Man, an all-wheel drive P1 would be violent to experience.
It would hook. Well, actually, you don't even need all-wheel drive. McLaren Senna is the successor to the P1 technically, which has less power but is way faster around the track. And people don't like that as much because it's a lot more stable to drive.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, maybe there is a threshold then, but man, if the P1 is the threshold for that, dude, there's a lot of fun that you can have in between.
No, because we're already seeing a decline in driver enjoyment through the advance of safety features. If you look at the new M5, it has all-wheel drive now, which you can put into rear drive mode. The new M5 CS, right, is the fastest M5 today. It's got all-wheel drive. It's got an automatic gearbox. It's actually automatic. It's not dual clutch, if I remember correctly. It's an actual torque converter automatic. Even faster than dual clutch, apparently, somehow, while being smoother because you don't have that weird engagement and you don't roll on hills.
Kudos to you, BMW.
Yeah, so the new M5 CS, significantly faster than the Cadillac CT5V Blackwing, the manual transmission, obviously. in a straight line.
In a straight line.
Around a track, CT5V is still faster, while being only rear drive, so it's more exciting, and having a manual transmission in 2022.
Kudos to Cadillac
For building a car that is more exciting and somehow faster, but yet more dangerous.
It might very well be the last of its kind.
That's what they're saying. Well, actually, the Cadillacs are committed to building a kind of like hybrid-y kind of performance cars. That's why this is such a big deal.
That sounds
which
right.
means that we have to review that CT5V soon, because someone is offering us to review it.
Oh.
But yeah, like
Plug for the next video.
plug for the next video. But yeah, what are companies supposed to do, right? Are they going to on purpose limit what features you can get in a car like a BRZ so that they can maintain that purity and stuff? Maybe. I don't know.
From the company perspective, like so many of them, how many companies out there right now make cars that they're focused on their sports car first? Porsche, of the big volume automakers, Porsche.
That's it.
That's probably it.
Lexus is a far second, because they're the only ones that make a sport, a high performance sports sedan that is the slowest in its category, but it sounds amazing because it has no turbo.
But like everybody else, like their sports cars are secondary to what they do.
Yeah.
For an automaker to survive, especially because it is such an expensive and competitive industry, they have to make those volume cars.
Very low return.
Yeah,
too, right?
and like even Porsche has come out and said like the Cayenne saved Porsche. They make the Cayenne. It's not what they care about, but they make the Cayenne because it funds their development of the 911 and all those others.
Yeah.
Everything else that they make.
It's a hardcore version of Ferrari back in the days, right?
Yep.
They made their crap road car so they would fund Enzo's F1 team.
Exactly.
That's its only purpose in life.
And so, like, I think the reality is just that not enough manufacturers care about that. So you're probably right. Like, what we're going to continue to get is these compromised experiences. But I do have high hopes that there are brands out there that maybe they don't care as much as Porsche, and it's not like their volume product and it's not their bread and butter.
Right.
But honestly, the fact that Toyota and Subaru saw fit to bring back the BRZ, that means that they care. That means that they're trying. Nissan's bringing back, the Nissan Z.
Which is on the same chassis as 370, but whatever.
Yeah, but even the fact that they're doing that says that there are people within Nissan who care enough about the driving experience to say, we want to build a sports car.
Yeah.
And you're right, there's probably going to be compromises to that in the name of modern safety, modern technology, and just sharing components with other cars in their family. But I think that if you have a brand that cares enough to do that, I think you have a brand that's going to care enough to hopefully do it right.
Yeah.
I hope.
I hate admitting this, but I think at one point, how do I explain this? So, going back to the horse analogy, someone that really cares about the horse riding experience, they will go out and find a way to accomplish that.
Sure.
I'm sure back in the day, there were plenty of opportunities for you to ride a horse.
Yeah.
Someone that's really into studying the art of piano, they will go out of their way to find an actual piano and not a keyboard. That said, that's a little bit different because, those legacy piano makers like Steinway will continue to build pianos because they don't need to make advancements in technology.
No.
Or maybe they do. Maybe they're finding that, hey, sales of our, a classic piano is slowing down. Maybe we need to start investing into building keyboards and stuff like that. For like, a DJ or for like a music producer.
Steinway and Sons keyboard.
Yeah, like an electric with a mighty output and stuff like that. So I think some of the cars, for the true car enthusiasts, it won't matter that there isn't a modern version of the car that they're looking for, right? It won't matter that a BRZ has become a marketing scheme for Subaru to sell more cars because it is nowhere near analog like before. They will have gone to automatic only for some reason. And so the true car enthusiasts, they don't need to buy a new car. They will just go use. So maybe it's not a problem.
Yeah.
Is what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
Which is kind of sad, but it also is...
I mean, it is a problem long term though, because eventually, there's only, you can only buy these used cars or keep these sports cars on the road for so long.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll become where all sports cars are made by niche automakers like Morgan. If the only sports car you can buy is a Morgan 3-wheeler.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's not necessarily a huge.
Some of these auto manufacturers are also starting to produce old parts again. Like Mazda in Japan will rebuild you a first-gen Miata.
That's fantastic.
That's kind of cool, right? Like, so basically an old school Miata, but as if you bought it in 1990, which is kind of cool.
That.
Toyota started manufacturing parts for the Mark IV Supra because used parts were going for so much money. They're like, that's not acceptable. Let's build you new parts then.
Try and keep some of these.
So maybe it's not the end of the world. I mean, it's sad to think about as an auto enthusiast that, but at some point, horse enthusiasts. I keep going back to this analogy, but horse enthusiasts were like, oh, so sad that these guys aren't, appreciating the beauty of the horse. They're using these machines to get around,
So let's take that a step further.
Okay.
On the roads today, I can't take a horse on a highway or even really a city street.
Not unless you're Amish, I guess, in one of those really small towns. Yeah.
You're not wrong.
Yeah.
They're not watching the video though.
Yeah.
But is there going to be a point at which you can no longer drive your own car on public roads? That's, as somebody who enjoys the act of driving, that's the piece that does really worry me.
It would really suck if, just like a horse, we would have to tow our gas-powered cars to a track just to enjoy that experience. Or, just like a horse, you get your own ranch, but with us, we would get our own racetrack at our...
Yep. Buy a plot of land, create a track, get sideways.
But, trying to stay on topic, though, we started this whole conversation about technologies in cars to make them safer. So do you think that cars, like the traditional car like this, do you think that's going to get banned first because of safety reasons or for emission reasons? Which is...
Oh, I mean, so emissions 100%. Gasoline cars are already there's already a,
that's a good point,
deadline on them in France. I know France, I think, said 2030. Germany, I want to say 2030 as well.
Washington State here, I think they had some optimistic goal of 10 years from now or something weird like that.
So, like,
they're not banned. Like, your gas cars are banned, but you can't buy a new one, basically.
But, I mean, they're all going to die. Like, all of these gasoline cars, 99% of them aren't going to be kept on the road for that long.
Yeah, I don't want to keep a 2016 Corolla on the road for an excessively long time.
No.
That's not worth keeping on the road.
So I think in that specific argument, I think emissions is going to be the first thing to go. I don't know that it's ever going to come to a full-on ban unless they do like another cash for clunkers thing, where it's like, hey, you have a gas car, cool, bring it to us. We'll give you a nice what it's worth and then some so you can go get into an EV.
I think some people are optimistic that we can eventually ban manually driven cars because they're literally just not safe. Like an iRobot. It's literally legal for you to drive on the freeway like manually. But I think there's going to be a lot of pushback from that because of socioeconomic reasons, right? Because then you're literally saying, well, if you can't afford to buy an automated car, then you're not allowed to drive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, at a certain point, it all kind of works out, like long term, right? Like, even if the first fully autonomous cars are going for 40,000, 50,000, whatever that number is, as those cars exist for so many years, the used market starts opening up. Like it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Everybody who buys a car is going to be in one at some point in the future. Mm-hmm. It's just going to be a question of how long they let us continue to drive. I don't want to say self-driving cars, but me being the self-driven cars on the road.
I think if we're
piloted cars,
as we conclude this episode, I think in terms of driver safety, like driver skill being developed and stuff like that, I think it's a matter of self-discipline. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Like I think people need to take a little bit of extra time to kind of brush up on basic driving skills.
Absolutely.
It's the discipline to, when you're learning to ride a bike for the first time, being willing to take off those training wheels yourself, even though you didn't have to. You could go your whole adult life with, training wheels on your bike, but it really benefits you to take them off.
Oh yeah.
Right. Similarly, challenge yourself. Maybe don't use your backup camera. Be a little bit more attentive, like things like that. Take a driving course. That's a big thing that I would really like to do as well to improve myself as a driver, is to learn how to drive on track, because that'll teach you what happens to a car, at limits. Make yourself a better driver.
Every winter, first snow, I go out and I try to. I'll push my car to the limits in a safe area in snow, just to kind of remind myself. It's been a year since the last time I saw snow. So I want to try and remind myself of what that's like, where the limits of the car are at. And I think more people should do, like you say, things like that.
Yeah, I think overall these technologies are genuinely great, but it's those exceptions like the automatic headlights that we're talking about. It can be a dangerous game when essentially auto manufacturers are making it too easy. It's the ease of access to performance that you're talking about with Tesla, right? It's but I think in general we live in a society where we cater towards less intelligent people.
things have to be built for the lowest common denominator.
Yes.
Yep. That is a principle that is very...
which has its
yeah.
pros and cons. Mostly cons, as we've seen nowadays.
Mostly cons.
No, I like it. Yeah, I think some of these technologies are good. And I'm saying this as a car enthusiast because I don't like them. But I think it will save me from the majority of people that are driving on the road today. And that's a benefit to me.
Yeah. I mean, objectively, roads are safer these days. Like, cars are safer. There are fewer accidents, I think, per capita.
And more people living through accidents because of things like airbags.
Mm-hmm.
Right. No, I agree. Thumbs up for technology.
Thumbs up. At the end of it, what would you rate? I need a Lewis score here. 1 through 10. We'll get a Lewis score. How would you rate technology?
Well, honestly, 7 to 8.
7 to 8?
Yeah.
On
a scale of 10,
technology?
what, a C to B rating? That's about right.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
C's
it's not
good
bad.
degrees.
Just, it did for me. No, I mean, technology should be embraced, but there at some point, for me personally, I like learning skills the old-fashioned way. Right, it's the difference between, it's the reason why our teachers in elementary school was like, you gotta learn how to do long division the old-fashioned way before you do it on a calculator, right?
Yeah.
We actually have all calculators now, right? Contrary to what they thought. Oh, you won't have a calculator when you grow up. We actually do, but it still is beneficial to me as a human being, right? To know how to do it the old-fashioned way.
For sure.
Right, like in the military, they don't teach you just to use your GPS, right? They teach you how to use a old-fashioned, map, compass, maybe even navigate by stars, right? There are benefits to you as a human being to learning how to do things the proper old-fashioned way. So
Your tech shouldn't be a black box. It shouldn't be just like this. I get in my car and I have no idea how it drives through the snow, but it does. Because then when it does fail, a sensor goes out or something.
Yeah, I like it. Thumbs up for technology.
Thumbs up for technology.
Thumbs up on this video. Like, subscribe, etc., etc. See ya. Goodbye.